morning. Welcome to our program on cultural diversity. I'm Bob Tverdik, Chair of Iowa State University's Extension Affirmative Action and Civil Rights Advisory Committee. Before our panel discussion begins, we will have an opening remarks from Dr. Milton Glick, Provost of Iowa State University, and also from our new Vice Provost for Extension, Dr. Robert Anderson. Dr. Glick is first as he talks about setting the pace for cultural diversity in the workplace and serving clientele.
Good morning. I'm pleased to welcome you to this important workshop. This will be an exciting year for ISU Extension. As Bob Anderson, our new Vice Provost for Extension, gets to know you, you get to know Bob, and together you get to plan for the future of ISU Extension and for the services we provide the state of Iowa. We all have an opportunity to make Iowa a better place to work and live. I'm especially pleased to be part of this workshop on cultural diversity. ISU has a grand tradition dating back to its establishment. From the day of its establishment, ISU was open to members of all races and both genders. Indeed, it was the first land-grant university in the nation to be so open. 100 years ago, George Washington Carver entered this university and became one of our most distinguished graduates, reflecting the best of what ISU could be. That is, reflecting a concern about the environment, a concern about agricultural profitability, a concern about feeding the people, and a concern about cultural diversity. If we go back to the day of our founding, at the inaugural address, President Welch spent fully 1/3 of his address talking about the importance of this university, or this college as it then was, being culturally diverse and being open to women. As we address our land-grant tradition, we must be affirmative today. And we must recognize that strong as our beginnings were, we have not always lived up to that commitment and fulfilled both our obligation and our responsibilities. Today, as we look forward to the next decade and the next century, we must understand that when we talk about cultural diversity, we are not talking about doing something that is altruistic or doing something for other people. We are talking about creating an environment in which we can fulfill our responsibilities. By the year 2000, fully 1/3 of the nation will be minority. Already the workforce is more and more becoming equally male and female, and colleges are today more female student-oriented than male student-oriented. If our nation is to prosper, if our state is to be competitive and to have a high quality of life, we cannot afford to allow one person to fail to reach their potential. We cannot afford to waste a single mind. Thus, ISU Extension has both an opportunity and an obligation to play a leadership role in setting the appropriate environment to open the doors in every county to people of all races and both genders. Recently, the United States Department of Agriculture released a special report on the importance of cultural diversity. It pointed out in this report that of all government agencies, USDA ranks 52nd out of 56 in the employment of women and minorities. They have set as part of their agenda changing this number so that we become an integral part of what must happen to keep our nation competitive and make it a better place to live. I am confident that with the support of the people in Extension today and of the people that support ISU Extension, the state of Iowa will be a better place to live in the future even than it has been in the past. I look forward to hearing the positive results that come out of this workshop, but more important, out of your efforts in this regard. Thank you very much.
Dr. Robert Anderson will now discuss the importance of cultural diversity.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate having the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you, the ISU Extension staff, talking about cultural diversity. I want to begin by saying again that together our intent is to build the world's best University Extension service. We will be known as the Iowa State University Model for Extension. Now, for us to be the model for university extension systems around the world, we have to be an exemplary model of affirmative action and cultural diversity. We have to be an exemplary model in the way we operate our extension system and in the programs that we deliver. This morning I'd like to talk about these two things separately. First, why cultural diversity is important within extension, and second, why cultural diversity is important in our programming. Many of you have heard me talk about extension having respect for all of the people that we do business with, both inside and outside our extension operation. You've heard me talk about how important it is that every person in extension live the golden rule that urges each of us to treat every other person that we come into contact with in that manner that we ourselves want to be treated. We must have respect become one of our core fundamental organizational values. Respect for people means that we acknowledge that each of us is a different human being with different life experiences and different abilities and different perspectives. Respect for people means that we respect and value the differences among us. We want to have respect and to value our differences because we want others to respect and to value our own individual uniqueness. Remember, that's the golden rule. Now, there's another, more pragmatic reason that we want to value and respect the differences among ourselves. Research has clearly shown that small groups do a better job of problem solving when the group includes persons of different cultural backgrounds, and, most importantly, when the members of the group respect and value the differences among the members of the group. Now, since we want to be the world's best university extension operation, we want our extension staff to be the world's best problem solvers. And to have the best problem solving among our extension staff, we need to have culturally diverse staff, and we need to respect and to value that diversity. So that's why it's important for us in extension to work hard at affirmative action in hiring and in our promotions. It's the right thing to do from a humanistic perspective, and it's in line with the golden rule. It's also the right thing to do from a pragmatic perspective. It improves our organizational capability. Now, to speak for a few minutes about cultural diversity in our programming. Again, we're on the track of becoming the world's best university extension operation. So our programming must be world class. Iowa doesn't have as much cultural diversity among its citizens as many other states do. So perhaps it's easier for us to fall into the trap of failing to exhibit the appropriate diversity in our program materials, or into the trap of not aiming enough of our programming at minority populations. We have to be careful to avoid both traps. Recent demographic studies indicate that by the year 2000, a third of our nation's workforce will be made up of people who are Black, Hispanic, Asians, or Native Americans. So this morning I'm challenging each of you who have program development responsibility to be sure that your program materials reflect this reality. Be sensitive to the explicit and implicit images that you create. Also be sure that your materials exhibit appropriate sensitivity to the issue of gender bias. See, most of our audiences are residents of Iowa. And since Iowa doesn't have a large minority population, we have a special obligation to communicate the importance of having respect for our culturally different people and the value of cultural diversity in our larger society. This is perhaps most important in the programming that we provide to youth, because the youth of Iowa often go on to other universities or to take jobs in other states where they will encounter higher minority populations. So it's our responsibility to do all that we can to help prepare these Iowa youth to have respect for and to value persons of culturally very different backgrounds. Unfortunately, I'm not smart enough to have all the answers to all the questions about how we in Extension should improve our affirmative action in hiring or promoting, nor do I know how we should improve our programming to better exhibit the respect and value of cultural diversity. What's important here for us today is that we begin to work on these issues, that we work together, and that we work conscientiously to improve. I expect this teleconference to raise our awareness, to increase our resolve, and to improve today some aspect of our affirmative action effort. And I ask each of you to work with me to improve today and tomorrow and again tomorrow, until at some point, and I hope well before January 1st in the year 2000, I hope we can all say that Iowa State University Extension is the model for affirmative action and for respecting and valuing cultural diversity. Have a good conference.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Now let's meet our panel members, and we're fortunate to have four excellent people. They are, to my immediate left, Dr. Theresa McCormick, Associate Professor of Secondary Education here at Iowa State University, Dr. Richard Carter, Professor of Agricultural Education here also at Iowa State University, Mohammed Khan, Iowa State University Extension horticulturist, and Bill Lindstrom, Area Director for Iowa State University Extension. I would like our panelists to respond to this question. If you don't have a culturally diverse population in your county, should you be concerned with the civil rights climate? And if so, why? Dr. McCormick?
Thank you. I give a resounding yes to that question. I'll outline briefly my 3 points and then I'll go back to the details. One of the reasons why we need to definitely address this question in a positive way is simply to fulfill our American creed of equality and justice for all people. Secondly, as has been mentioned in earlier comments, that we need to be prepared for the 21st century, and I'll address some issues about demographics and about mobility of our population. And third will be the point about our connection of cultural diversity in the state of Iowa and our global citizenship. We want to grow beyond the fear of diversity that is often the case when there is not so much diversity as is the case in the state of Iowa, and grow beyond that to appreciate diversity. I'll detail some issues related to race, socioeconomic status, and sex and gender. To deal with fulfilling the American creed of equality and justice, we have to recognize that there has been a great gap between our ideal and our everyday practice. We look at issues such as inequality of outcomes in the preparation of our youth in this state. Nationwide, we have a high dropout rate. Iowa does not have the dropout rate that California has, such as the high rate of Texas is 35%, but Iowa has a 14% dropout rate of its youth. That's too many young people who are lost to their fulfilling their full potential. The high suspension rates is another problem, and in Iowa that is a particular problem for minority youth. We look at the penal system in the country, and particularly in Iowa too. There's a disproportionate number of black people who are in prison, particularly black males. And the connection with education is that 80% of these people in prisons are dropouts. Each of these costs $24,000 annually to support, whereas it only costs $3,400 for a year in college. 46% of the prison population in the nation is black, and Iowa also has a disproportionate number of blacks in prison. So those are problems that indicate that we have not met our ideal of the American creed for equality and justice for all. Other things that are in the current media have to do with an increase in racism on college campuses and even here in Ames and in central Iowa. We've had documented cases of increased racism and harassment. Another indicator of our lack of meeting the American creed is underachievement of females and minorities, and underemployment and underpay for women and minorities in the nation and the state. Another area to look at related to diversity, we keep hearing that Iowa doesn't have much diversity. I'd ask us to take a second look at that. We don't have a high rate of racial diversity, but there are other factors of diversity to look at, one of those being socioeconomic status. This is an important factor in Iowa, considering the economic conditions in the state. And related to the education of youth, socioeconomic status is more relevant to achievement than the race of the student. A new catchword is students at risk. I don't go along fully with that, but you know that catchphrase. Students at risk are highest when they come from female-headed households. And that's true in the state of Iowa as well as the nation. 1 in 4 of our families now are headed by single females. And women now make up 60% of the labor force, and over 50% of college students are female now. So these things impact on the socioeconomic conditions in the state and on equity issues when the highest in number of people in the poverty class are females, and that impacts on children. For all of us, whether we fall in that poverty class or not, we need to be concerned about the change in the economic status of us all, because since 1980, the clear indicator is that the middle class is declining, and that has always been the strength of this country, is to have a strong middle class. And we know that the lower class has been increasing, and that upper echelon of very wealthy people is increasing since 1980. My second point has to do with being prepared for the 21st century. Again, even though Iowa doesn't have a high racial, cultural, ethnic diversity, we have to prepare our youth for the fact of mobility. Our students especially move out of the state, and on the other hand, we get new immigration of people from other cultures, such as the Southeast Asian immigration in the last 10 years. So there is diversity. It's just not in the high numbers that other states have. Reference to the demographic changes also have been mentioned earlier. By 2010, 38% of the U.S. citizens under 18 will be minority. In the largest states, California, Texas, Arizona, and Florida, the minority will be the majority by 2010. In Iowa, the minority student population now is 5.6%, but by 2010, 3.1% will be minority, which is an increase to 8.7%, and that is a significant increase. A projected population growth number given from 1985 to 2000 says that we will have 4.5 million minority kids born versus 60,000 white kids. So that tells you what our country is going to look like, and that clearly impacts on the labor force, the workforce. My last point is our need to recognize cultural diversity in communities that are not necessarily diverse, because there is a connection between our appreciation and recognition of diversity here at home and our global citizenship. When we deal with diversity, accept it, appreciate it, see it as an enhancement and enrichment of life rather than a threat, it expands our whole human consciousness and connectedness. So our ultimate goal then is to have citizens who respect and appreciate diversity rather than fear it. Those people then will be less likely to stereotype others, exhibit prejudicial attitudes, or discriminate against others based upon race, sex, religion, national origin, SES, or age. I'd like to close with a quote from Gandhi, which expresses my sentiment about appreciation of diversity. Gandhi said, "I want the winds of all cultures to blow freely about my home, but not be swept off my feet by any." Thank you.
That's a good quote. Thank you, Dr. McCormick. It sounds like there's going to be a significant amount of changes in the next 10 or 20 years, and we need to be prepared for that. Dr. Carter, could you comment on the same question?
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate this opportunity to take part in this program, and I too would join Dr. McCormick in saying, yes, we need to be concerned, even if our communities or our counties are not diverse, and maybe even more so. Let me just provide some of my rationale, and maybe not so many figures and facts that Dr. McCormick provided us. But my first point would be that no location is really isolated from other counties, state, or for that matter, the world. For example, the prices that our farmers receive for their product is determined by the world market. We're in a global economy. We need to have understanding and appreciation among our people of different cultures. Also, our communication links really the world together. We've done away with the Saturday night communication system in our world, whereby we'd go in for groceries, send the kids to school or to the show, and then the parents would sit on Main Street finding out what was happening in our world. Now we sit in our dens or our living rooms, and we, with a flip of the button, we're in touch with the world. Now this has an advantage, but it also has disadvantages. The advantages is that we have contact with people of all faiths, races, ages, and so forth. It has a disadvantage, I believe, that opinions are formed on very limited knowledge of the situations we see on TV, which leads, I feel, to stereotyping individual and forming opinions without the full story. An example is the much publicized Japanese acquisition of land in the United States. We hear a great deal about it on our news reports, yet we hear very little about the British owning much more land in the United States than the Japanese. We form opinions without adequate information, which can lead to misconceptions, prejudice, and ill feelings toward others. I would also join Dr. McCormick in talking about the mobilizing a mobile society. The more mobile, the more likely people will live in a cultural diverse communities. They need to be prepared for this, as Dr. Anderson mentioned earlier as well. I was raised in a small community, one in which I knew about everyone. When I go back to that community, I know no one. They've all moved. Now, we need to help people gain a better understanding and appreciation of different cultures and respect and for races, different in age, where they can grow and live in such communities when they do move. I just use another example we just had school start in most of our communities. Many of the students, it was their first year in school. As they entered that school, that was a change in environment for them. Many of them were prepared for that change, and I'm sure are adapting well. There are some that probably were not ready for that change in environment, and they experienced some difficulty. I notice the same thing occurring here at college. We have students coming from very homogeneous backgrounds for the most part here at Iowa State with very limited experiences in dealing with diverse groups, and sometimes they have more trouble adjusting to the diversity than they do in taking courses and completing their course requirements. A third point that I would make is that we tend to question or be frightened by those things we don't understand. In dealing with a pluralistic society, we need to seize opportunities to break barriers and increase understanding and tolerance among groups. I would like to quote John W. Gardner, who served under 6 presidents of the United States, including Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. Makes the statement, "We can no longer afford to indulge without constraint the ancient human impulse to hate and fear strangers, those not of our tribe, not of our religion, not like us." We need to help all in facilitating a greater understanding and appreciation of differing views and values. Most of the College of Ag students probably, if given an opportunity, they would take all ag courses when they come to Iowa State in completing their programs. But if our students are to succeed, they need to have a much more rounded education. They're required, therefore, to take a broader curriculum than just taking ag courses. In fact, beginning next fall, the College of Ag, students will be required to take a course on global awareness or multicultural awareness as part of all of their curriculums. I think this reflects the necessity of preparing our people, our graduates, for differing kinds of situations that they'll be faced in the near future. My fourth and final point that I would make deals specifically with extension. And that is that the counties extend the university to the people. It's the arm of the university, which has really been a proven model. And under Dr. Anderson's vision, a model that will be world-class. It's a process of transferring information to the localities of the state. And I think Extension's record speaks for itself. Its impact has been clearly documented. What better way to increase the understanding and tolerance among people than to use and to tap such a system?
Thank you, Dr. Carter. I think your point about diversity being an opportunity rather than a hurdle is an important point. Mohammed, would you like to comment on the same question, please?
Like the former speakers, I'd like to say absolutely to the question, and I'd like to approach it in a little different manner. About 2 decades ago, you probably found most of the minorities, and that would be blacks and Hispanics mainly, scattered in the larger cities of Iowa. And perhaps if you were looking for other minorities, it would probably be at the universities, larger universities. Today, this has changed tremendously because we have seen minorities have scattered around the state of Iowa. In small towns, we have professionals and business people who are there with the families, and the families who have children going to the local schools, they are exposed to a different type of society, and so are the children in the school system. I've been fortunate enough to be teaching in several smaller towns in Iowa in vocational agriculture, and I've been exposed to myself to many of these. When we have the migration of people from different lands come to this country, they come with different cultures, and I feel that we should be very cognizant of the fact that the cultures are a little different than ours, and even more sensitive to their religious beliefs. In that case, then we should be able to learn a little bit more about the other cultures and religious activities. Let's suppose that we are having a 4-H program, and we have the kids that are coming for a meeting, and let us suppose this happens to be during the holiday season, during Christmas holidays, for instance. And we had planned to have a program on Christmas activities. If, for instance, we've had someone coming from a different culture, we had started out this program, we should have probably known what the background would be. Maybe we have embarrassed such a person by having an activity such as Christmas carols or Christmas activities that this person may not have been believing in, or possibly was never acquainted with. So we should learn more about the other person's beliefs and so on. These are some of the things that I have experienced myself. I'm the father of 4 daughters, and they all went to school here in Des Moines, and they have been exposed to some of these things. At one particular instance, when my daughter was, one of my daughters was first grader, she was asked to do a project of a Christmas activity during one of the classes. And she was embarrassed because we've never celebrated Christmas, never been exposed to such a thing. And teacher insisted that she should do this particular project. And she started crying. Well, the teacher was not informed about our beliefs, because we happen to be Muslims and we don't celebrate Christmas. So it took a little while before the teacher really caught on and really understood what was really going on. So she made her do another project. But we should be sensitive to these activities. After the Vietnam War, we had an influx of migrants, Southeast Asians, that came and started businesses in Iowa, perhaps in a small town or maybe in the city of Des Moines. Many of them went to farming because this is what they did back home. And I found that we were not quite up to date on the kinds of things that they do, the practices and so on. So they start moving around to different counties. And so we should be prepared to know what are some of the things that how they tick. If we found out that if you wanted to have a group of Vietnamese on a program, an extension program, you need to contact the key leader on that, for the particular group of people, either a Hmong Lao or Vietnamese group and so on. And they would have recruited that for us. And also there are certain types of things that we need to prepare for that meeting before the presentation. So those are the things that we need to learn before we begin a program. We should be sensitive to the cultures, to the religious beliefs, and to some of the things that people have done in different cultures. These are the few comments that I'd like to make. I think that they are more on a practical basis that I've seen, a little different from the statistics that Dr. McCormick has thrown out on us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. You raised an interesting point, is that it's more than just being aware of cultural diversity. What's really important is to act on that diversity so that all that are involved in it can benefit from it. Bill, would you like to comment on the same question, please?
Sure. Yeah, I'd just make an opening comment, and to the staff in the Southeast area, I'd say surprise. They didn't know I was going to be here, most of them. Being the fourth speaker on a panel such as this gives one the inclination to state that the other people have pretty well answered the question and then just go on to the next item on the agenda. That's an inclination, but not much of a compulsion. I would like to take a couple of different twists possibly to the question. The direct answer to the question obviously is yes, we do need to be concerned about civil rights. I would like, however, to comment more on the culture diversity situation than I would the civil rights question as such. Quite understandably, over the past number of years, we have come to define culture and race as being somewhat synonymous. And I'd like to submit that if you look at Iowa's culture from a racial point of view, you end up saying that Iowa is rather homogeneous, and that really is not true. There is a great deal of cultural diversity in Iowa, and so you need to remember that when you talk about culture, you're talking about all of those factors that make a race or a religion or social group or some other group distinctive, and it's on those distinctive things that you need to look at. If we expand that culture diversity, as Dr. McCormick has suggested, to include economics, then you end up with a great deal of culture diversity in Iowa. And I think because of the business that we're in, we need to be aware of that. And so as we deal with the people with whom we deal and work with, we need to be aware that there is a cultural diversity within our counties, and none of us can escape that. We need to be aware of what that diversity is. We need to know a little bit about the history of that diversity. and we need to then show some respect or have some respect, have an appreciation for that cultural diversity. This will help us relate to the people with whom we're trying to work in those groups, will help those groups relate to us, and I think overall will help us do the types of things that we want to do. In addition, I think our response to, or the way that we respond to the culturally diverse groups helps sets the pattern that the community or the broader community is going to show towards the culturally diverse groups. If one were to attempt to find a single word that would, in a sense, explain or try to be a key word that the various equal opportunity groups have tried to use over the years, or to explain what they've been trying to do, I suspect that that word might be access. It's been a case of access to facilities, access to services, access to people, access to ideas, and I suppose ultimately access to the benefits or the enhancements that derive from being able to obtain those accesses. Over the years, we have looked at the access from a legal point of view, that everybody needs to have access to our services. For instance, in extension, we need to be sure that physically our offices have access or are easily accessible to people. One of the things then, and I suspect that in that area we've not done too badly. I think generally people are able to get to our offices. I think generally people feel comfortable when they come into our offices. One of the things that we've not been able to measure too well is how people feel as far as the access to our services to us is concerned. And I think this is an area that we need to continually work. I suspect that we will have arrived when we get to the point that anyone that needs our services knows, either know in their head or know in their heart or know in their gut, that they have access to us and to our services. And when we get to that point, we will have arrived. We're not there, and we need to continue to work on it. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, thank you, Bill. You raised a question that I'd like to kind of follow up on before our break, and this is open for the whole panel. Many times, do you have any suggestions in your work with clientele as to how you could improve awareness and actually suggestions to improve problems that are dealing with, let's say, sexism or people who are over 40, Vietnam veterans? If you're in a situation that is in an office or a county that doesn't have these groups, how can you instill in these people the importance of being aware of it and acting upon it? Would any of you like to comment on that?
One of the things that I would mention is that you need to provide information.